Hi, it's Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I usually say if it's Monday, it must be Pablo Torre, but it's actually Tuesday and it's Pablo Torre. So welcome, Pablo.
That's the kind of week it is, Jen. It's upside
Yeah,
down. Tuesdays or Mondays. Who knows when we are, where we are anymore.
exactly. Let's start with a lawsuit that was filed against Steve Ballmer that sounds an awful lot like what you've been reporting about the effort to avoid the cap, the spending cap.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I reported this last night. Steve Ballmer has been sued by 11 aspiration investors who allege salary cap circumvention for Kawhi Leonard. And they go on to detail in very granular phrasing that they allege that Steve Ballmer was investing in the company to secretly funnel millions of dollars to star NBA player Kawhi Leonard. And I'll give you the legal thrust of why this is a lawsuit, and it's a civil suit, of course. But
Right.
they allege that Ballmer was, quote, complicit in and aided and abetted co-founder Joe Sandberg, that's the co-founder of Aspiration, co-founder Joe Sandberg's fraud for his own self-serving purposes. And the investors allege that they would, quote, not have invested and or kept their investment in Aspiration if Ballmer and Sandberg had disclosed the true nature of Ballmer's investment, end quote. Which is all to say that this deal with Kawhi Leonard, this no-show job I've gone on and on about in the various episodes I've done and the conversations we've had, it was, again, to be very clear, secret. It was never announced. And so these investors are saying that if we knew that this was part of the story, then we would not have invested in this company because Steve Ballmer, as they make clear in the complaint, was a key part of the legitimacy of this company. He was this anchor tenant, this anchor investor who brought real money in. And these 11 investors are, yeah, they're people with money who lost money in ways that they are seeking redress for.
I'm curious to what extent they relied entirely on your reporting. Did you learn anything new in the lawsuit? Are there any allegations in there that you hadn't covered in some fashion or another?
I mean, it's hard to surprise me at this point. And so what I will say is that in my examination of the suit, there are details that I was not familiar with when it came to the perspective of investors, right? My
Yeah.
focus in my investigation, the multi-part series, has been the employees, the former and current employees of this company. And so now we're swinging the camera around to the people who had actually put money in. And so, in terms of the Kawhi Leonard cap circumvention scheme that they allege that I have reported, that's all quite familiar to me. What is different and I think quite notable is that here you have something that I had heard but not quite explicitly reported, which is that there are people who relied on Ballmer's diligence as their reason for deeming the water to be safe. And the secrecy of the deal is the thing that I think caused them to reevaluate. Okay, hold on. I'm not merely suing Joe Sandberg, and this is a lawsuit also against Joe Sandberg, but it is now worthy of an amendment to include Ballmer himself. And so on that front, that is where we are getting into parts of the story that I have frankly left until now. And I look forward to continuing to examine it.
Absolutely. Now, the wonderful thing about civil litigation is something called discovery. They will get to take his deposition under oath. They will get documents. They will get answers under oath. They will get to depose other people who are at the heart of this. It's going to be very hard now for the NBA to shove this under the rug, that there is a separate litigation process that's going to probably uncover every scrap of paper and take a deposition under oath from all of the major players.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an interesting thing to do this reporting while simultaneously doing the reporting we've been doing into a separate scandal with the NBA, with NBA betting and these poker games.
Yes.
And of course, the law firm that the NBA trusted to investigate the NBA betting scandal, Terry Rozier, the player, the active player in particular, has been Wachtell Lipton. Wachtell Lipton is, of course, the same firm they're using to investigate this. The difference has been the federal government has been a check on Wachtell and the NBA's investigation in the poker and gambling scandals because, of course, the government has subpoena power. Of course, the government is the government. And whatever the NBA and Wachtell chose to do in that investigation, there was another investigator, the government, that was going to be able to come over the top and say, actually, here are two indictments, here are the figures, here are the allegations. In this case, the check, so to speak, on like who's trying to find the truth in these stories with aspiration, the Clippers, Steve Ballmer, and Kawhi Leonard, it has been me. And so now here you have, through the process of discovery, should it get to that point, you have another legal mechanism to prevent it just being a journalist versus this high-powered law firm and the NBA investigating itself. Now you have 11 investors who are seeking to use the legal system to pry open through discovery a bunch of things that I have not been able to see before because, as you may suspect, I also do not have subpoena power as much as I fantasize about it sometimes.
You have the power of the microphone, though, which is almost as great. It will be interesting to see whether the NBA continues their investigation against Ballmer, or they say, we can't really go any further because there's this civil lawsuit and they're not going to talk to me so long as the lawsuit is pending. It's going to be very interesting to see how much they are willing to continue independently and how much they now stand back and say, oh, we wish we could investigate, but we really can't.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of what that's going to look like going forward?
I do want to give, a hypothetical sort of view of this, which is that, sure, if you're the NBA and you're Wachtell, you're thinking to yourselves, okay, we can ask everybody for their phones, documentation, emails, all that stuff. Will they give it to us? Mileage varies depending on the person and their incentives. Mileage varies, by the way, if they're an NBA employee versus merely a random person who happened to work for a company that you have no, again, legal authority over, right? So that's the trick. It's always been the trick of doing these quote unquote outside investigations, which are themselves, I would say, conflicted premises because, of course, you're hiring a firm to investigate you effectively. And you want to also, as that firm now, want to be hired back to do more of these things. Wachtell is a repeat law firm being hired by the NBA for lots of things, as just recently mentioned. So, in terms of what they could say to say, we got to kick this can even further down the road, frankly, I have always anticipated that the can is getting kicked as far down the road as humanly possible. And Adam Silver, the commissioner, has already said we are looking ahead to really the end of the season for a potential verdict, so to speak, in the Wachtell investigation. This case, though, what it does do is I think it must widen the scope of what you are now looking into. Here you have in a lawsuit 11 investors who I presume you might want to reach out to, or at the very least, you have thoughts that occur to you when it comes to, what's going on here? How messy is this? How legitimate are the reports that I've been making? Well, now you have 11 investors who are saying, this is quite meaningful to us. And of course, mileage varies on whether you believe someone suing someone else in civil court. All fair game, all something that Wachtell, of course, as one of the best law firms in America, is quite used to. But it does, I think, extend the scope and the timeline of what they probably started off looking into.
Got it. Let's shift gears into your recent experience with two very prominent New York politicians. We are recording this on Tuesday afternoon, so we don't know if Mr. Mamdani is going to be elected mayor. It looks like that's going to be the likely outcome. Governor Hochul, of course, is up for re-election as well. What were you doing, and what did you guys talk about? What did you find out about their sports interests?
Yeah, so one of my ongoing fascinations has been why is the Democratic Party as a concept so bad when it comes to using sports in a way that feels credible politically? And so part of that acid test is merely like, are you talking to and running politicians who know anything about sports? And so this was an afternoon in Astoria, Queens. The Chiefs were playing the Bills, the biggest game on the NFL schedule this past weekend, I dare say. And Governor Hochul and Zoran Mamdani were watching the Bills game together at Murphy's Bar, which is an institution in Queens, a diehard Bills bar, the foremost Bills bar, I think, in New York City, a great place. And what I wanted to do was grab 5 minutes of their time. In the end, I would have taken more, but I got 5 minutes. Understandable. This was, almost the eve of election day. And I want to ask them about their sports fandom and just see what they would say.
Yeah.
And and the test, I gotta say, like on some level, if you're an actual sports fan, you're ready for the question I led with, which is, what is your most traumatic memory as a sports fan? And we all can flash back to whatever that is. And, watching Kathy Hochul, who I had never met before, but watching her close her eyes and describe, of course, Scott Norwood going wide right, the Bills kicker, in the Super Bowl, losing in a way that became quite familiar and traumatically familiar to Buffalo, the city, and the fan base. That was quite real, And so look, it's just funny for me to get to hear a politician, I think in her case, be the most likable and persuasive version of herself by being asked a question that has to do with sports. That
Exactly.
that was my scouting report. And Zoran Mamdani, by the way, in this setting, had the opportunity to gin up some answer because I had no idea what he was going to say. He had the opportunity to gin up some answer about like a football, an NFL game, or a basketball game, or a baseball game. But he
Right.
said a story that also, I think, would have passed the lie detector test because he told a story about going to the World Cup and watching a game that I think most Americans would not be familiar with, but is a real sporting event experience. And I'm like,
Excellent.
that was a real answer that I also found persuasive and true to who he is. And so the whole thing about being a sports fan, we talk about this all the time. Like, why do we talk about sports? Not merely because it's whatever this vector of political potential. It's also because we care about it. And for them, they chose the things they care about. And I just think that's a useful case study in how to answer questions about sports.
I am curious that neither one of them picked up on the fifth inning of the World
Okay.
Series last year.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
that's
they just didn't
that's
want to go there.
yeah,
Yeah,
they
I
they
know.
maybe they maybe saw the thought bubble above the interviewer's head because all I
Right.
was doing was watching Garrett Cole not cover first base. Yeah.
So, is your conclusion that at least for these two politicians, they should do more sports talk? They should be more kind of out there in their sharing of the games and the love of sports?
I just think if you are actually comfortable thinking, and I mean, not even thinking, if you're comfortable feeling sports, like you actually enjoy it, you can share your memories of it. Look, this is not, as always, there's this test of like, and I think, as we've talked about before, like Trump fails this all the time. JD Vance fails this all the time. They like to perform like we're real American sports fans. And I find it deeply inauthentic. In this case, I think that if you like sports, and I watch them just like, again, sports, to be very clear, I want to be cynical about this too. Of course, politicians should want to be involved in sports. Trump and his administration is all over sports. The thing for me that's baffling is why it's just been this competitive advantage that's been surrendered by the left. And in that way, if you can find a candidate, a politician who actually can relate to normal people, and I guarantee you, at the Bills Bar in Astoria, Queens, it's not the woke left ivory tower. It's a bunch of people in Queens who like the NFL. You're going to be able to just access people and do a very basic thing, which is seem three-dimensional and relatable by doing what might amount to, if you're an actual sports fan, the least. And so I don't think it's that hard, as long as you're not needing to pretend. And they did not seem like they were being media coached to talk about Scott Norwood in the World Cup.
Right. And that is the key. If you're going to do it, you better not fake it because
We
that'll
can
come
smell it.
across.
We can smell that too.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly. So we now reach the part of our conversation where I get to say, oh my God, that World Series, the entire series. I mean, you could look
Yeah.
at the end of game 6. You could look at any one of several plays in game seven, but just the entire thing had this sense of like epic, at any moment the Dodgers were going to lose, at any moment they were going to be knocked out, and yet they somehow persevered. What was your sense of game seven? That was like filled with multiple moments of, I can't believe that just happened.
Yeah, I was thinking of you. I was imagining how sweet this must feel. I used to feel it as a Yankee fan. I used to feel
Yeah,
the sense that like somehow we would pull it out in the end. Um, my main thought though was not only how incredible Game 7 was, but how incredible baseball is at its best.
yeah,
We
yeah,
are always talking about in sports the regionalization of baseball and how for 162 games we all sort of like are off in our own silos, right? And we're caring about our team, but we have no idea what's happening in like the NL Central or whatever. And now in the postseason with the national spotlight, you remember why you fell in love with this sport without a clock, this sport with infinite possibility as a consequence of its clocklessness, in which
yes.
drama is turn based, meaning that every ratcheting up of the bottom of the ninth into the 10th, into on and on and on, the 18th, as it was
The
earlier
18th,
in this
yes.
series, you feel the tension and the pressure, and those who meet the moment, as we often talk about, they build legends for themselves. And so the legend that I was marveling at, I mean, there are a couple of them, but like Miguel Rojas, who is, the list of guys hitting a homer to tie a game in the bottom of the ninth
He
in a
would
winner
not be at
take
the
all
top.
series. But it's like, but now it's him and Bill Mazeroski all time
Yeah,
in terms of just
yeah,
like who's done that clutch.
exactly.
And then you get to Yamamoto. I mean, the guy who is just like there,
That was extraordinary. That was one of the most
extraordinary.
extraordinary performances to come back after 96 pitches and pitch that well in the clutch at the end of game seven was like, that's one for the history books. I mean, I cannot remember something of that ilk
Oh,
before. It
special.
was it was also, I thought, a tour de force of managing. I guess in every World Series, there are tens, if not hundreds, of micro decisions that you have to make. But it seemed like there were more of those kinds of calls this time, in part because Dave Roberts was dealing with a bullpen that was so shaky, in part because you have this very unusual stuff with Otani.
Yeah.
And they had a group of hitters, frankly, who really weren't producing. So there's a lot of pressure to shake up the innings. Um, Give us your evaluation of how you think he managed the World Series.
It's a great question. Look, we're in a results-based business. He won the World Series again, and I think
Yeah,
he should be recognized as such. I think it's really tricky, the Otani of it all, the starting rotation, how you deploy that. How do you use your bullpen in a game seven? These are all, look, here's the two things are true story of Dave Roberts, because again, I'm a Yankee fan, and I
I
remember,
know this is so painful for you, and I so appreciate it.
oh, no, 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 but I look, let my trauma in this case be instructive as to your joy.
And
Um,
I will feel it in another year or two or three. I know.
at some point, it will end. Although I don't necessarily see the horizon on the sun setting on this empire in the way that I felt when I was growing up, a Yankee fan. And I say that to say this: Joe Torre is never going to get as much credit as he deserved because he
Right.
had the payroll of
Exactly.
of of everyone's dreams. He had all of the talent. The thing about Dave Roberts, beyond the fact that he makes the right tweaks and it all worked out, even though of course it looked like it wouldn't, in which case, to be clear, the story I would tell right now would be quite different. The thing that I marvel at is he and this team, and I'll give you this compliment as again a Yankee fan. They are not only the richest team, they're also still somehow one of the most likable, and
Yeah.
that's really hard to do. Like Otani is likable. Yamamoto, because he has a little notebook and he's gonna pitch till his arm falls off, despite being the highest paid pitcher when he got that $300+ million deal or whatever, still likable. Freddie Freeman, despite all of it, still likable. Miguel Rojas, from obscurity to history, likable. Clayton Kershaw, who we saw shirtless. We talked about Kershaw before, just like celebrating his last hurrah as a Dodger at Dodgers. I mean, not even at Dodger Stadium in Toronto, but just like winning the World Series in Game 7. Like likable. Really hard to do that. Dave Roberts, I would say, also likable. So I give him credit on a bunch of different levels for pulling it off.
Fair enough. I think part of the likability and part of the story of this World Series was the story of Los Angeles, that they have had such a traumatic year. And here was, in some sense, a World Series about just hanging in there, just keep going, just hang on by your fingernails. And that the thing that LA has been traumatized over most recently, their diversity, was perfectly embodied by this team that is so international, so multicultural, every race, every age, every background, that those two things kind of came together. And I think you'd have to have like a heart of stone not to watch that celebration in the streets of Los Angeles. They called it, the Otani flu or the Dodger flu, everyone
Yeah,
taking off from work, missing school, to see what this meant to so many people in so many ways. And I think that's like the maybe the bigger picture takeaway for Los Angeles, for the country, and for this notion that we are still fighting over in this country about what it means to be an American, who gets included, who's we the people. And you couldn't get more international, more diverse than the Los Angeles Dodgers or Los Angeles.
totally. And by the way, I should say this too. Like a thing that I talked about with Mom Donnie that I thought about while watching the World Series as well, as the prices on everything go up, right? We talk about extreme payroll and spending and all of that, and the Dodgers are owned by a gazillionaire, and all of that is true. Dodgers Stadium is still one of the great places to watch a game
Oh, it's
because it
gorgeous. It's
encapsulates
gorgeous.
it encapsulates the melting pot reality, let alone dream of what America
Yes,
still actually is. And I think that
exactly.
as we talk about this stuff on election day and we're looking ahead to like how is sports changing and evolving, we also need to just remember accessibility to
Oh,
games
yeah,
such that people who helped build the empire that is now winning all of these rings, they get to still enjoy that. And
exactly.
LA is such a great case study in that. And I am hopeful and I am fascinated as to how this tension between billionaires and the common people who still are why this team is special, right? Like
Absolutely.
it's essential to the fabric of the Dodgers. I dare say that's where I'm hopeful that this can be like an example that proves that you need to care about the fans.
Absolutely. Now, the question I have is who goes to the White House? Do they
Mm,
go to the White House? Does Kiki Hernandez, who is one of the more outspoken people who came forward and made a rather
yeah.
impassioned statement, do they go and shake the paw of Donald Trump? I suppose many of them will go. I don't know that all of them will go, but every team in the Trump era or eras has had to make this kind of choice. What's
Yeah.
your sense? They mostly going to go?
My sense is that some will and a lot won't. And my sense is that we are living in this moment now. I just gave the episode that we published today. I gave a talk at the University of Connecticut's Dodd Center for Human Rights. And it was an amazing opportunity. And we talked a lot about like what happened to athlete activism, right? Kneeling and raising your fist like Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who I was honored to like speak after at this event. That stuff seems to be in the rearview mirror, right? Like
Yeah,
we used to really talk about this in the first Trump administration. Now it's it's a function of I think certainly the money flooding into sports and certainly the attitudes and the popular momentum towards athlete protest. Um, draining away from the conversation in a way that is a bummer. But I will say that there are other. You don't need to bring a sign into the White House to make a statement. And I
yeah,
think Kike Hernandez, who was somebody who did his own version of a politically meaningful act of resistance because
Yes.
while the bar has lowered on what counts as athlete protest, the impact as a consequence can still be quite achievable.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so if you don't want to go and you talk about why, more power to you. It is an opportunity to explain what you care about and what you will compromise on. And my hope is that every athlete, however they feel, sees this as an opportunity to either choose to co-sign an administration that is behaving horrifically, or this is my now editorial framework, obviously, or explains why they don't want to be used as a photo op by said administration. And I think that
Exactly.
choice should be explained to them if they don't know it. And I have a feeling that if you live in LA and you're around what's been happening with ICE in that city, my hope and expectation is that enough will notice what the choice really
Right.
is.
Right. Last topic for us. I happen to be one of those people who gets television via YouTube TV.
Yeah.
ESPN has been off because they are in a contract battle with YouTube. Talk about like two giant,
Yeah.
companies butting heads over how many billions. What's interesting to me is because there's so much sports, I miss it less than I thought I was going to. Because on college game day, okay, you can there's too many games to watch anyway. Now, granted, I had the World Series during this period of
Yeah.
time, but has ESPN maybe overthought its advantage given the fact that sports is everywhere and anywhere?
It's a more dangerous game now than it used to be, and
Yeah.
I can feel it myself. I mean, we have so many options. There's so many ways to just keep up with games. Back in the heyday of ESPN, of course, their control over the cable television bundle was unquestioned.
Yeah.
And now we're living at a point where not only is the promise, by the way, of the a la carte sports experience fundamentally a dishonest dream that got sold to us as if it was going to be better to be a sports fan now than it was before because we could now access everything. It turns out that it's just harder to find the thing you care about and it's more expensive to watch, which is why the whole like series of carriage disputes coinciding with just like how do I know what NBA game is happening and where? I need to consult like a flow chart. It's crazy.
Exactly.
It's actually crazy. And part of
It
that
is.
confusion and complexity is this indication that I think people, whether they are actively choosing to or not, are actually okay with their options being narrowed. And that
Exactly.
is where I think we're going to conduct a really interesting experiment in which the
I think that's
economics
right.
of the cable bundle are not the economics of streaming. And of course, sports is the most valuable thing, but I would be a lot more afraid to test it if I was, by the way, YouTube TV or ESPN.
Yeah,
Both ways. I'm just
I
like
agree.
I think I think there's risk in ways that are novel to the era.
I think that is exactly right. So in the meantime, I have ordered my Dr. gear. And the great thing and the terrible thing about baseball is it's true of the Super Bowl, it's true of basketball championship, that feeling of victory is effervescent because 90 some odd days before pitchers and catchers report, and you start it all over again. And that's the beauty, that's the frustration of sports. It lasts just a moment. So enjoy it while
Yes.
you have it.
Yes, the seasons will turn soon enough, but I think you guys are in this one. I beat an amazing Blue Jays team, which is
It
feeling the opposite. So also know that there's a zero-sum game when it comes to this
yes,
emotion,
it is.
and
It
never. And as a
is.
Yankee fan, can remind you, it doesn't make it any less delightful. So yeah, enjoy it.
Exactly. And by the way, that game that you watched was a very good game
Yeah,
between the Chiefs and Bills. And we'll talk about
yes, it
that
was.
next week. So thank you as always, Pablo. Monday, Tuesday, whatever day of the week it is. We look forward to seeing you. Take care.
See you next week.